My name is Leslie Thompson. I am Director of Adult Programs at the Sid Richardson Museum, and I want to thank you all for joining us for this lecture tonight, which is presented in conjunction with our current exhibition, which is titled The Cinematic West, The Art That Made the Movies. And it's an exhibit that explores how artists like Fred Remington and Charles Russell, along with early filmmakers, really helped shape popular ideas of the American West. Now, tonight's presentation invites us to consider that vision from another perspective, one that centers Comanche presence, performance, and agency in film history. While many popular narratives suggest that Comanche story ended in 1875, our speaker tonight will show us how that story continued and evolved on screen. From the silent film era to today, Comanches have played a dynamic role in shaping cinematic history. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Dustin Tahmahkera, whose presentation tonight will draw on personal, tribal, and cinematic history to invite us to see these films and the West itself with new eyes. Born in the Comanche Nation capital of Lawton, Oklahoma, Dustin Tahmahkera is a parent of four. He's a playwright and performer of Comanche-centric theater, and he's a professor of Indigenous media and sound at the University of Oklahoma, where he serves as the Witt Carey Chair of Native American Cultural Studies. A dual citizen of the Comanche Nation and the United States, with the Tahmahkera and Lacefield families from southwestern Oklahoma, he engages the history and futurity of creative natives' images, sounds, and performances through on-screen, on-stage, and on-mic oral and aural storytellers, performers, and cultural critics. Dustin uses his art and writing to strengthen relational accountability, well-being, and bridge building in the spirit of his creative and intelligent ancestors. Dr. Tahmahkera's books include Tribal Television, Viewing Native Peoples in Sitcoms, which was published in 2014, as well as Cinematic Comanches, The Lone Ranger in the Media Borderlands, published in 2022. He has consulted on Hulu's feature film Prey. He's interviewed about Comanche history for Ken Burns's PBS film The American Buffalo and other documentaries. He's co-wrote and narrated the popular TED Ed film about his ancestor, Chief Quanah Parker. And Dr. Tahmahkera's short play, 911 Comancheria, starring a Comanche man who challenges a West Texas town's 1970s centennial celebration, received both the Best Play and Audience Favorite awards at Native Voices, which is at Autry's Play Festival in Los Angeles. He currently serves as a Mellon-funded Generation Now playwright with the Autry and the Children's Theater Company in Minneapolis for his new Theater for Young Audiences play, Comanche Girl on the Moon. And with that, I will pass the mic off, so to speak, to you, Dr. Tahmahkera.
Hey, thank you, Leslie. Can you hear me okay? All right, good, good. So again, thank you, Leslie, and thank you to everyone there at the Sid Richardson Museum for helping to make this event possible. Thanks to all of you who are out there virtually listening and viewing this. A lot of places folks could be right now on a Friday evening, and but I appreciate folks showing up. And been accommodating during what could turn into some pretty rough weather. Sounds like there in Fort Worth, as well as here in South Central Oklahoma. I'm coming to you from old Comanche homelands, as well as older homelands for Chickasaws and Wichitas, Caddos, and other peoples here in what is currently predominantly called Norman, Oklahoma. As Leslie mentioned, I'm at the University of Oklahoma, where I research and write and teach courses on who I call creative natives, native artists, filmmakers, sound makers, television, and theater. And a lot of our work here in Native American studies is built through this very kind of work of relationships, of building, relationships and attempting to be accountable to our relatives, to past, present, and future. And so, with that said, the title of this presentation, now starring Quanah Parker, who is my great 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 grandfather. And I'm citizen of Comanche Nation, as well as with the Quahada Band, which is Quanah's band. All Parkers, Tahmahkeras, and certain other relatives are a part of this Quahada Band of Comanche people. And the subtitle there's Cinematic Comanches and a legacy of agency of decision-making power that has always been in place among Comanche peoples, even during those times in the 1870s, during what many may call surrender. There were still so many decisions being made by Quanah and other Comanche Paraibona or Comanche leaders. That's a picture. They're the cover of my book, more recent book, Cinematic Comanches, that basically lays out a something of a cultural history of our people in front of the camera and behind the camera. That image right there comes courtesy of my Chickasaw friend and elder, Tawana Spivey. This photo is in his personal collection. And that is a picture of Quanah Parker's son, White Parker, on location in the Wichita Mountains during filming of a silent film that he was in. And then what you see on both sides of the screen there, a couple of still images that come from the short animation video that I helped to write and narrated on the life and times of Quanah Parker and Comanche people. An image there of Quanah on the left, and then on the right there is I wanted to make sure that the artist, the illustrator who did a really really nice work from Latin America, that he also included an image that gives a shout out, a nod to Quanah Parker taking time in a very busy schedule to actually be in a silent film, and that's part of what I'll be speaking on this evening. This is a traditional map, of Comancheria. It's very common in Indian country and in our Department of Native American Studies to talk about who we are and where we come from. So this is a very conservative outlined map of roughly 240,000 square miles of what's known as La Comancheria, of our traditional homelands. But it's also very misleading. This is the map that I prefer to go with. This is a map made by Comanches for Comanches. This comes courtesy of our former TIPO, or Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, Jimmy Arterberry, and our current Director of Comanche Nation Realty, Stephen Lee. And they put this map together to help reflect much broader migrations and much broader movement of where our people have been and continue to have presence in. This shows us this is a map that's spanning across from northern Mexico all the way up into Alberta, just north of Montana. It includes the Great Basin region that I'm kind of pointing toward here among the Shoshone people. We actually come from Shoshones, as some of you on this call may know. We come from Shoshone people. There's various theories and stories of what may have happened when there was a group of people who split back in the 15 or 1600s and came to be known as Comanches, but we have our own insider name for each other, and that being Numana. Nama to refer to one Comanche, and Numana to make it plural to refer to the Comanche people. And this right here, our Comanche Nation seal this is right into the heart of Comanche country, and especially for Quahada Comanches in West Texas, where a lot of our people come from. Our present day headquarters is about right here in Southwest Oklahoma, in the Comanche Nation capital of Lawton, which also is where I was born. This here is a drawing of Quanah Parker by my cousin, Nakona Burgess. You can check more of his work out at nakonaburgess.com. I'd also give a shout out to his brother, another cousin of mine, Quanah Parker Burgess, and check out his work too. Two very established artists, as like their dad, Dr. Ron Burgess, and this is a quote from Quanah, where shortly before he passed, he passed in 1911. He was born sometime around 18 in the 1840s, and shortly before he passed, 1911, he said this three times actually to an audience, predominantly non-native audience at the Texas State Fair, um, where he told them to tell Texas history straight up, to tell Texas history straight up. He was doing this work of, it's a term that we have is Madoeka, or just if saying that to one person, Madoe, but to more than one, Madoeka, which is a common greeting that we use nowadays among Comanche people. But Madoeka, in an older context and tradition, one that many of us are adapting to present day, it means to report or to tell it, which is something that Quanah Parker was constantly doing as he went from fighting, as hard as he could and as long as he could, and against the U.S. cavalry, against other tribes, against the buffalo hunters, and it was especially when up against Randall McKenzie and his cavalry, and up against the buffalo hunters with the long range rifles, were just really became highly outnumbered. And outpowered when it came to the artillery, and he eventually made what was a very I can imagine a very difficult and very heart-wrenching kind of decision, but he decided to go to present-day Fort Sill, which is right there alongside, adjacent to our Comanche Nation complex in Southwest Oklahoma, and made that decision to go there to go through this process of adaptation, but never to stop being Comanche. And by him putting down those weapons, he was able to step into this reservation space and just did such a number of things of trying to bring prosperity and more than just survival to him, to his family, to a lot of Comanche folks. And he's not without his critics, but within our family, the stories I hear is one of him being a bridge builder, someone who is very committed to education, where he decided, he and his family deciding to send some of their kids to Carlisle, for others to the Carlisle Indian School, for others to stay back, in Southwest Oklahoma, and basically to just learn so many different cultural ways to not only be Comanche, but to also understand what various historically opposing forces were also up to, and trying to learn those ways and trying to see some of the best of both worlds, as one of my uncles tells me, and continues to teach us about navigating through these spaces. He's also this idea of telling Texas history straight up. This is something that, he was very invested in when it came to how history is being told. This was also something that his daughter shared, who went to Carlisle Indian School. And this is from Laura Needle Parker, who you're seeing here, her student card, where she's been, I think this was like an alumni card, and it's in old school cursive, which I really like, where question number 9 on this longer form, this longer student card, she was asked, to tell us anything else of interest connected with your life. And of all the things she could have selected, she picked this, that she's basically saying here, I have written a publication, or I've written a book that she says was undertaken, about the story of my dad's life, of Quanah Parker, undertaken because he requested me to put out the book I'm translating here, so people might see in light, as because newspapers get so much out of shape, get things, distorted and out of shape. And we've, of course, been dealing with those distortions for many centuries, but also being careful that, I don't want to come across as someone who sounds as if just reactionary to what others have said about us, and often without us, but really thinking of this more proactively, and trying to follow the lead humbly, if you will, follow the lead of Quanah Parker and what he was doing for our people, and in that very important bridge building work. And I guess in some ways, maybe it's not too surprising he becomes a bridge builder, but he also is someone who I think could be seen as very ahead of his time. He refused to be boxed in to just, he comes from a white mother, and you see a picture of her there, Cynthia Parker, who Comanches had captured when she was age 9, just outside of present day Waco, Texas. And that's also with his sister. She's nursing her daughter there. This is one of the very few pictures that, are surviving of her and of his sister, Prairie Flower. And she was a white captive who was raised Comanche. And then the Texas Rangers come along once she's an adult, once she's married to Peyton Nakona, Quanah's dad, and has 3 children, Quanah, Prairie Flower, and his brother Pecos. And basically, the Texas Rangers, seem to think that they were quote unquote rescuing her and taking her back to white civilization, when that is, the way our oral history goes, that is not what she wanted at all. She wanted to stay with who she recognizes as her family, among her Numina relatives, her Numina Comanche people. Then you see here a picture of Quanah on the right next to this famous portrait of his mother and sister. And Quanah is someone then with a white mother and with a Comanche father who refused to have to pick one or the other, even in these current days where so many of us with our own mixed identities, and like Quanah, I have an Anglo mother and a Comanche father. And there's still folks who want to try to box people in, right? And want your own identities to fit into these clear-cut categories. But he was someone who was reaching out, even when some of his mother's white relatives didn't seem to want to have much to do with him. He still attempted to make those connections, and a Comanche leader who was really embodying a lot of the ideals of, building relationships and showing respect to both sides of his family. Very admirable. What you see here, though, is where so many people, whereas Quanah and his daughter and others were trying to be more in charge of the narrative, it's something that I've called in fancy academic jargon, representational jurisdiction. They were trying to state jurisdiction on how they're represented, right, and how they get represented. But of course, there's a lot of this that can be very much out of our control, and you have other people trying to step in. Folks like T.R. Fehrenbach, whose covers, 2 different covers you see on opposite sides of the screen right now, trying to write about us, very much without us. And then you have this book that is not a AI added stamp on the front there, where it says finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. It's something of a head scratcher there of how that sticker comes to be on there. But that was, S.C. Gwynn, a reporter with Texas Monthly, who had written an article about Quanah and then goes on to write this book that is very colorful. It's got a lot of stories in it. It also basically reinscribes and reinforces a lot of the kind of the good old boys network of predominantly white Texas male historians. And I have my own critique that I've published elsewhere in the book, Cinematic Comanches, if you want to check that out further. But suffice it to say, this is a book that our Comanche Business Council actually just last year adopted a resolution saying that we do not really recognize this book. We do not recommend this book by Gwynn as something that is reputable among our people. And part of it was just basically always refused to talk with us and continue to use a lot of the same old sources that have been done over and over throughout pretty much the 20th century. This also, this talk that I'm giving is in support of the Cinematic Westerns exhibit that Leslie was talking about and has helped to put together there at the Sid Richardson Museum. And, I'm really intrigued by this painting that's on the left here that I think is tied in with, with their homepage, and obviously it's in the exhibit there at Sid Richardson, the one by Oscar Burninghouse, Movie Night at Taos Theater. Burninghouse, was a resident of Taos, and this was in celebration of a new theater. And he painted a lot of non-native and native indigenous subjects on canvas. And so this was not surprising at all that, he would bring this into play. It does remind me somewhat of Stagecoach, which you'll see the poster there in the middle. That's also part of the Cinematic Westerns exhibit. John Ford, who this is basically the film that helped to alter how silent films had been doing it. I would say that it was much more progressive with certain silent films, and I'll get to that in a moment. But Stagecoach was one in which, it's the Apaches, it's not Comanches, but in Hollywood kind of speak, it's almost interchangeable when it comes to Comanches and Apaches. It's not that there's a lot of Apache specificity or Comanche cultural specific things in there. And you have these marauding, Apaches who are already on their own homelands, who, are shooting at John Wayne's character and all these, as the poster says, nine strange people who are on this quest together. Something of a manifest destiny kind of film, and problematic in a lot of ways. But one of the things, again, I appreciate with Burning House is that, unlike the poster with Stagecoach, he does include the indigenous subjects, even if it is in these repeatedly violent kind of ways that we've seen over and over in art and in movie posters and elsewhere. Still, indigenous presence is very much there. And then Stagecoach, that poster there, or the film itself, was also inspired in part by Frederick Remington and his particular piece, Downing the Nye Leader from 1907, which is also an important year to make note here, because 1907 is when Oklahoma Territory and Indian Territory merged to become this state currently called Oklahoma. And I'll come back to those dates in a moment. When we fast forward to 1956, this is like the next major film for John Ford and John Wayne to do together, and could do a whole talk on just the Searchers and of how distorted a version it is, especially when it comes to, how Cynthia Ann Parker is portrayed, even though Natalie Wood's character in the Searchers is, has a different name, goes by the name Debbie. It's the archives actually reveal, and I give credit to Glenn Frankel for tracking this down. He went into a lot of the John Ford papers, as well as looking at the original novel version and what the writer of the original book, The Searchers, had to say, which has a starkly different ending. If you've never read the book, I believe a young Comanche woman takes out John Wayne's character kind of in the latter half of the book. The film, of course, could not do that. This speaks to the bravado and the overall star power of John Wayne by this point in his career, or Marion Ross, the gentleman known on screen as or in Hollywood as John Wayne. And you have what Frankel uncovered was that, yeah, if any one particular captivity narrative and captivity story on the Great Plains was to help most inspire the Searchers, it was the story of who you see pictured here, Cynthia Ann Parker, Quanah's mom. And again, the movie, very distorted version of what they do with that. They don't show her necessarily being homesick, or being so sad to leave her in Comanche relatives. Instead, she basically is brought back home to the so-called white civilization. It's Henry Brandon who plays the lead Comanche leader in this, known as Chief Cicatrice or Scar. Henry Brandon, German-American actor. It said the Navajos on set who played the Navajo extras who played the Comanche extras. They supposedly called him the Kraut Comanche, to kind of give a shout out to him playing a Comanche, but also to his own German-American ancestry. And then he goes on to play Quanah Parker in this film, Two Rode Together. And he basically plays the good Comanche. And that's how Quanah has often been framed, as if he's just assimilated, as if he's all about peace, and as if there's not so much more that is actually happening behind scenes. And so in Two Rode Together, there's the good Comanche portrayed by Henry Brandon, portraying Quanah Parker. And then I'm trying to remember the name of the bad Comanche, and it was like recurring name in Hollywood villains. It was something like Chief Blackwing, something like that. Don't hold me to that one. But that was a recurring theme of having the good Comanche and the bad Comanche. And this is also me taking seriously, though, films for when they will name a tribe and looking at what they're trying to do with any kind of Comanche specificity. Oftentimes it's more just in pan-Indian terms, but occasionally there are these moments where Comanche language shows up. Even in an old Lone Ranger film from like from 1930s is the earliest film I've heard where Comanche language is actually being spoken. I don't have a slide for that one ready here, but there are these various Comanche specific moments. Now, this film that I've left up on the screen here for way too long, this is considered one of the worst movies of all time. That's not just me saying this, but that is William Shatner, the William Shatner. Supposedly he was on a hiatus from Star Trek, and I heard it may have even been something of an LSD influenced trip of a hiatus. And he goes over to Europe and makes this film White Comanche, in which he plays not one but two Comanches. He plays the good Comanche who is in the denim jacket and the hat, and the bad Comanche who went around topless the entire movie. And eventually they battle each other. This is long before AI and everything, right? So this bad editing where they fight each other. And spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, nor do you need to see this, but from 1968, it's been out for a minute. It does not go well for the bad Comanche. And this is a recurring theme where the so-called peace or good Comanches take out the bad Comanches. This is not a blooper slide. This is for real. That is the Fabio, the guy you might, I'll date myself here, the guy who used to do the I Can't Believe It's Not Butter commercials. He also is a writer. A lot of people, or what I guess you could call him a writer. That is him on the cover of a book called Comanche that he supposedly wrote. And then there's some others by other writers. Not going to spend a lot of time on this. I promise you, I've only seen the covers. These are posters from another film that really got overshadowed by the searchers, came out the same year from 1956, a film called Comanche. And very hyper masculine, hyper ultra violent stuff. Nothing that atypical, nothing unusual when it came to how Comanches are being portrayed. This is part of what gets nauseating is over and over and over. It's about the violence, and it's not about all the other things, the scenes of diplomacy. It's so much about the raiding and not the trading. There's such a fragmented, incomplete kind of story that gets told over and over again, especially in older Hollywood. And in this film, Comanche, you have Kent Smith, who is a British born actor, not native, as far as I know, who portrays Quanah Parker, the Anglo-Comanche Quanah Parker. That's him on the left. That's him meeting his cousin. There's this odd storyline in Comanche where they meet each other, they realize they're cousins, and Kent Smith hears about this treaty being made between the U.S. and Mexico, and they actually give him a line. The Quanah Parker character, as you see here, he actually has a line to come in and basically says, what about us? No one thought to consult with the Comanches about this U.S.-Mexico treaty that is going across our homelands and where we're traversing and what we call home, where we live and play and work and all that. And so I actually found this somewhat of a unique moment in the mid 1950s for a film. I'm not trying to call this film totally progressive at all by any means, but there is this moment where he actually has this big scene of saying, yeah, in effect, what about us? What about Comanches? And that question was actually partially being answered even that same year during this film, Around the World in 80 Days, a popular film back in its time. I think there's been a remake since then. And this was on location. They literally went around the world with a lot of their filming locations for that big blockbuster cinematic film back in the 50s. And they stopped in the Wichita Mountains, and who you see here are predominantly Kiowa and Comanche, Kiowa and Comanches who are round dancing and doing this for the camera as well, and shows up briefly in a scene in Around the World in 80 Days. And that's on location in the Wichita Mountains, which is where so much gives us a nice transition to where so much of the early films that included Comanches playing Comanches and part of that legacy of agency that I'm talking about here, that's where it happened, was on location in our homelands in the Wichita Mountains. 1905, this picture here, Quanah is right here, kind of in the middle, kneeling. Quanah, Roosevelt, I'm sorry, right here, President Roosevelt here, Theodore Roosevelt, and various cattle rustlers, different folks who were in this photo. They went on a wolf hunt. Jack Abernathy, who I think might be pictured right here, Jack Abernathy was known as Catch 'em Alive Jack. And they wanted to not only go on a wolf hunt with him there in Southwest Oklahoma in Comanche country, they also wanted to film this. And so there is an old silent film, I think it's simply called The Wolf Hunt. But if you watch closely, or maybe don't even have to watch that closely, I think it's just yeah, kind of a sad scene of a coyote. I think there was some there was just some bad low budget special effects, or so-called special effects, for 1905 filmmaking of what they actually did with that. But nonetheless, Quanah Parker was a part of this. He was a part of this expedition and was host, if you will, of and helping for this to even play out. And so he is partly responsible for that film being made. And he also goes on to be in this film that I gestured to earlier at the outset, The Bank Robbery. It came out in 1908, but it was actually filmed in 1907, right there again in the Wichita Mountains, what our former Comanche Nation chairman and an elder, Wallace Coffey, calls the heart of Comanche country, the heart of Comancheria. And so as Oklahoma Territory and Indian Territory are merging into statehood, Quanah is behind the scenes, serving as a tribal judge. He's helping to start a school because his own, Comanche relatives, Comanche children were not being allowed to go to the public schools in nearby Lawton. He becomes a school administrator, and helps to start a school for Indian children. He's making deals with the ranchers, so they can graze their cattle on our newly received grasslands. They're in our Comanche Kiowa, or our Kiowa Comanche Apache reservation back home in Southwest Oklahoma. He's doing a lot of different things. He's got, by this point, at least 7 wives, lots and lots of children. He's got his famous Star home that some of you on the call may be familiar with, that is still standing, technically, still there in Cache, Oklahoma, back home. And he's taken the time to be in this film, The Bank Robbery. Here, what you're seeing is a paper roll from the Culpeper, Virginia Library of Congress facility. They were very generous in taking this paper roll and magnifying images as best they could. You can watch this on YouTube, but I try to give kind of crisper images here from archival research, and you can actually see a sign that no longer stands there, the Wichita National Forest and Game Preserve. Again, Southwest Oklahoma, Wichita Mountains, a little bit closer to where I'm at than maybe where some of y'all are if you're in the Fort Worth area, but almost a halfway point. And you see him riding in the front there. Not much had been said about him being in this role, other than a few scholars and journalists saying that, yeah, he played a bit part, or he was a tracker, or he was this one critic called him the pacified but unregenerate chief. And all that name calling aside, to me, it's like we get to see and continue to get to see our ancestor, our relative, of how he carries himself, because this is, and you're just seeing still images, but there is the in the silent film, all the motions of how he walks, of how he gestures, how he does Comanche sign language, Plains Indian sign language, with some of the other characters on camera. And he basically plays a version of himself. The Bank Robbery is, as it sounds like, just something of a classic good guys, bad guys setup where there's some robbers. They actually got a former outlaw from real life to come in, Al Jennings, who came in and then became an actor. And he plays one of the bank robbers, and that is the Cash Bank as it was standing at that time. In the backdrop there, that's Quanah in the front. And Quanah helps to lead. It's not a bit part at all. He repeatedly rides in the lead on his horse. He even shows up in his own chauffeured stagecoach at one point. He's the only one who is shown with two forms of transportation. And then he also walks on his own feet. So there's actually technically three modes of moving about for him in this film. And for everyone else, it's just like one or two modes. But he's leading, this is after they've caught the bad guys. He's, basically playing this version of himself as I see him as protector and defender of homelands, and also having some fun with this. You notice he's, looking toward the camera. This is him as he's exiting the scene, and this is the very next split-second moment. And so when you look right there, you see the facial expression change just a little bit from that to that, and I see almost the like formations of something of a smirk as he's starting to exit the camera, looks right at the camera, and really like to think that, yeah, he knows what's up. He's aware of what's going on. And it's also such a serial comical playfulness of what he's doing here, that helped to really spark one of the core questions with my research. And that is, as we say in Comanche, Hakura Marumata Kuitak. Hakura Marumata Kuitak. Or, and here comes just a little bit of PG-13 language, show a trigger in case anybody, or a heads up, translates roughly to who's getting one over on whom, or in more of the vernacular, who is shitting whom with all of this. When it comes to filmmaking, when it comes to representational jurisdiction. And part of why I make that argument too is because of the stories that we know that have been left behind and that continue on about Quanah, and just such a rich sense of humor, and also such a rich sense of how to conduct business, how to basically how to be that much more fully human, and how to represent himself in humanizing ways on screen, and how he carried himself in very humanizing ways off screen. And yes, he does help capture the bad guys. This is a quick shot of his daughter, Laura Birdsong Parker, who is in a medium shot here in the doorway. You see her right here. And so she does have a very quick cameo appearance in the film. Fast forward to 1915, and his son, White Parker, Quanah's son, White Parker, was in this film, The Sign of the Smoke. Still asking anyone and everyone to try to locate any surviving reels of this film. So far, what we have are these images, and this again is courtesy of my friend who I mentioned earlier, Tawana Spivey. This is an image that he came across and in his own research, and it's showing a marquee. And it's also part of the Museum of the Great Plains collection, The Sign of the Smoke. It does show evidence that this film did happen, and that's from the cover of my book. Again, image courtesy of Tawana. That's White Parker on location for Sign of the Smoke, and in which he was the star of the movie. That's White Parker in more recent, in later years. This is an issue of the American Rifleman from 1946. Picture of White Parker. Here's an older photo of his sister, Quanah Parker. And I mentioned the two of them together because they also follow their dad's lead and go on to be in a silent film. You might be familiar with a film called Daughter of Dawn from 1920, in which basically Kiowas played Comanches and Comanches played Kiowas, and a lot of seriousness and a lot of playfulness. And they provided their own regalia, much like what would happen about 36 years later in Around the World in 80 Days, when Comanches and Kiowas providing their own regalia. We didn't need any of that Hollywood made in China costumery that someone might have in the wardrobe department. It was in-house. It was and by that I mean in village, in among our people already in an insider way. And so Daughter of Dawn, if you've never seen it, it's something of a quadrangle love story. I would liken it to a precursor to, say, Days of Our Lives and other soap operas. And a quick side note that with Days of Our Lives, Uh, the only surviving original cast member of that long-running soap opera Days of Our Lives is Marie Cheatham. Marie Cheatham, you may have seen her in the TV show Young Sheldon. There's a Nickelodeon show that she was on back in the day. And she's been in a lot of different productions. Again, she was one of the original cast members of Days of Our Lives. And the reason I mention her is because she was adopted or captured, if you will, back in the 1970s by some of our extended Parker family and Parker relatives, direct descendants as well of Quanah Parker. And she was brought in after she portrayed Cynthia Ann Parker in an old rodeo that used to take place in Cache, Oklahoma, and they would reenact the capturing of and this so-called rescuing by the Texas Rangers of Cynthia Ann Parker in her adulthood, and she would portray Cynthia Ann Parker, and she did that in a dress that has been on exhibit before at the Autry Museum that Marie donated to the Autry there in Los Angeles, and I was honored to and humbled to be a part of helping that exhibit to come together, along with one of the curators, Josh Garrett Davis. And that dress, incidentally, as far as we can tell, was made by Grandma Anna Tahmahkera. Grandma Anna Tahmahkera, one of our relatives who passed on recently at age 104. And was raised actually by the youngest wife of Quanah Parker, the one known as Tope. So this history that I'm talking about, this is not long ago. This is very present for us right now. Um, you also have additional relatives attempting to stake their own claims in how Quanah is portrayed and represented. That more of that work of representational jurisdiction. You have here some still images from a short film about Quanah Parker by that was written, as it shows here, by his great grandson Vincent Parker and narrated by his great grandson, the late Ron Parker. And you can find that this particular short film should still be on YouTube. Also want to give a shout out to another cinematic Comanche, and by these cinematic Comanches, I mean that term in how it sounds. Comanche people who have been in television and film productions, whether in front of the camera or working behind it. And included among them is my late uncle, Monroe Tahmahkera, who especially wanted to give a shout out to because of this talk being for the Sid Richardson Museum in Fort Worth. He was something of a celebrity, of a Comanche celebrity there in Fort Worth, and some of you on this call may know my uncle there. He also took time, like Quanah before him, to be in some film productions. That was not his full-time job by any means, but that he was asked to do a lot of things, and was very generous and just an amazing human being, with how he carried himself and what he brought to his own work with bridge building. And so you can catch him in reruns of Walker, Texas Ranger, and an old film by Jet Li, and some other productions that Uncle Monroe was a part of. You also have filmmakers today, like my Comanche cousin, Juliana Branham, pictured here, and fellow resident of Norman up here near us. And her film, among many other films that she's produced or made, this one I'll highlight because it's a Comanche-made film about a Comanche elder, LaDonna Harris, who I just saw recently the other day. She's going strong in her 90s there in Albuquerque. And so she made she made a film about our relative, about our auntie, LaDonna, and about her work in Washington, D.C. for many decades in the 20th century, and her ongoing work today of bridge building and of helping to bring justice to Native peoples and Native issues and Native rights. She's the one who also captured Johnny Depp, as she told me. She was trying to, part of it was reframing the old Indian captivity narratives and inverting that, instead of the ways those often were told by the white captives, and sometimes in somewhat truthful ways, but in other times in very sensationalistic ways that would help sell those books back in the day, of Indian captivity narratives and how they got reprinted in dime novels and some of these really early iterations of American literature in the 21st century. I remember Auntie LaDonna telling me once on the phone. She said, well, I got to thinking, here he was, here's Johnny Depp playing a Comanche version of Tonto. Been a longtime fan of his, thinking about his values, thinking about, a lot of different things about him back in the day. And she said, I want to do, this is pretty much a direct quote by her. She said, I want to do like old Comanche women would have done. Let's go capture Johnny Depp. And so she captured or adopted him. Some people critiqued her for doing this. She took some heat for it. But I come from the camp of folks who very much see plausible here what she was doing. She was building up cultural capital. And it was almost this question of like, why'd you do it? It's like, why not? Why not capture Johnny Depp? And there is, of course, a very long history of movie celebrities and indigenous tribes and the relationships therein. John Ford and Marie Cheatham and Johnny Depp and so many others. But she helped to be in charge of a lot of this narrative of capturing him and making kin, and to where they're still in touch with each other today. And he still calls her Pia, which is Comanche for mom. You also have filmmakers like Rod Polkawatchet, who did the film The Dead Can't Dance. This is supposedly the first Native American zombie comedy out there. And so I encourage you to check this one out. There's some funny moments. There's a sprinkling of Comanche language in there as well. Pray, that my late auntie and I were the initial consultants on. We were brought in back when it was actually called Skulls, before that was the working title, and then eventually became Prey. And this film, filmed in Alberta for the tax breaks and everything. And so Alberta became something of the Great Plains. But in our migration stories, considering we went up to Alberta, I don't think the irony is lost too much here, of just, part of what they were doing here and with Prey and being part of the Predator series. And there's an entire dub that you can listen to on Hulu to this film in Comanche. I actually have not watched it yet in the English language. I've only seen it in the Comanche language. A lot of behind the scenes Comanche folks helping to make that happen. There is a picture of my auntie, the late Juanita Patapony, and she's another cinematic Comanche, not only for her work on Prey, but also as being the lead consultant on The Sun on AMC with Pierce Brosnan, Elizabeth Francis, Zon McLaren, and others. She also was an executive producer of this really sharp short film by, I believe, a filmmaker from Fort Worth, Annalee Walton, and this short film Thistle Creek, which is something of a playing off of The Searchers, but really rich and nuanced in this short film of Comanche woman to Comanche woman, the way the story is being told, and really giving a lot more agency to Indigenous female characters. Also, she's worked with Marla Nonai, professional recording artist, and also very much a cinematic Comanche who's been in Echo with Disney and Reservation Dogs, a number of other productions. And then I'll close out with this. Who better to continue representing Quanah Parker than my cousin, Benny Tahmahkera, you see pictured on the left here, portraying Quanah Parker each summer with the outdoor musical Texas that happens there in Palo Duro Canyon. And again, Marla Nonai, you see right here, who also sings and acts in the outdoor musical Texas. And so this ongoing history of Comanches representing Comanches. And even as others attempt to speak for us, even as others attempt to speak about us, without us, and to represent us, here you have, I've only given you a few. I barely touched the surface of just how many examples there are of Comanches representing Comanches and staking some of those claims in representational jurisdiction and continuing this legacy of agency. And with that, I'll pause and be glad to field a few questions. Thank y'all.